So welcome to Priest Theorycrafting with part 3, it is now. We're going to be going over a deck that I am dubbing the Vampire. Some of you are going to be asking what in the world is wrong with me, why would I make a deck for vampires, come on. Aren't we already plagued enough in the real world by vampires, and what is wrong with me? Just bear with me, you'll understand why. Pretty quickly. Actually, you'll understand why right now, because basically what this deck tries to do is really nuke your opponent's life total while being able to heal yourself quite nicely. And the reason why I think this deck is actually viable is because of the prominence of aggro decks like Cancer Hunter. This thing should absolutely destroy Cancer Hunter. And decks like Zoo, things like that. What decks do I think this is weak to? Control Warrior, and interestingly enough, decks like my Chaos Control and other Steel Priest decks, where they just take your minions and use them against you. Why? With this Priest deck, the entire idea is to just sit there, and not necessarily with every single spell you have, but just in general, shoot damage at your opponent's face while keeping the board clear. Because you have things like Pyromancer, and you still have minions laying around. Pyromancer, Shadowboxer, Holy Nova, Alchemy Circle, you've got all the good combos. But most of the damage you're doing to your opponent's face actually will be coming from spells. You'll have a ridiculous amount of damage coming from them, but most of it does come from spells. Otherwise, the minions should be keeping the board clear. That means that decks like Control Warrior and Control Priest, which can heal themselves, should be really good against this deck, because they will just not care that you're throwing spells at their face for damage, because they'll just keep gaining more health, and you'll run out of spells before they'll run out of health. It's not, certain that, oh, it's a Control Warrior you're faced up against. Good game, you're done, go home. This deck can still beat that, but it struggles because of that aspect, and in addition with Control Warrior, because they run so many really strong minions later in the game, if they can just start to get there, and you're not close to killing them by the time it's hit turn 8, you're going to lose because you can't clear their minions. This thing does not run Shadow Word Death. It does not give a crap about big minions. It just tries to kill the opponent before they can get to big minions. So, really your opponent shouldn't be getting that late in the game. And if they do, you're probably screwed, unfortunately. So, let's get into the actual cards. What does this deck do for me to actually want to call it the Vampire? Well, let's start out with one of the cards that really inspired the name, Shadow Bomber. First of all, he looks like a vampire. Little vampire gnome with a battle cry of deal 3 damage to each hero. He costs 1, he's a 2/1. Some people look at this guy and they're like, well, it's another crap priest epic. Not really. Because on turn 1, if you're the deck that's trying to just kill your opponent super fast, then dealing 3 damage to each hero isn't that bad, because you don't care as much about your life total as you do about your opponent's, because your opponent should drop to 0 first. On top of that, you get a 2/1 minion. So this thing is like a Sinister Strike with a 2/1 creature on top of it, which is crazy good. So, Shadow Bomber, one of the big let's deal damage minions. We also do run Zombie Chow, because this is supposed to be shooting people for damage in the face. How does that work? Well, Alchemy. Alchemy is another really critical minion to the deck, because we are using such cards as Earthen Ring Farseer, which can restore 3 health with its battle cry. I'm running this over Dark Cultist, because with Alchemy, this thing's battle cry becomes deal 3 damage. And depending on your matchup, let's say you're against Cancer Hunter, one of the most critical things to do is be able to keep your health up. This thing does that in spades. I mean, you can drop this on yourself and heal, you can throw your hero power on top of it and just heal for 5 health on turn 5, easy peasy, there's no problem gaining life there. So, you really don't have difficulties using that battle cry to restore health. And on top of that, since you run Shadow Bomber, even if you really haven't taken that much damage, the battle cry can still be used if you haven't gotten Alchemy to heal yourself, because you've hurt yourself. So, Earthen Ring works there. And it can combo with Alchemy for damage. Zombie Chow, age-old combo with Alchemy to deal 5 damage to the enemy hero, especially when comboed with Circle of Healing to just spike in one turn. In this deck, I think the Zombie Chow will actually be held to use as a kind of Mind Blast. I could be wrong there, because Zombie Chow is still pretty good against aggro kinds of decks, but in this particular vampire deck, if your opponent gets off that 5 health heal, it can really be game winning for them, because this deck doesn't want the opponent healing. So I think the Zombie Chow would be held to combo with Alchemy Circle, and not played to help maintain board control, because again, this deck isn't really going for board control so much as let's make an empty board, and if Zombie Chow gets emptied off the board while Alchemy's not out, your opponent is getting good amounts of health. So that's another good combo. We are also running the 3-card Trio of Terror with Northshire Cleric, Shadow Boxer, and Wild Pyromancer. Just any one spell cast while all 3 of these are on the board will trigger Pyromancer, dealing 1 damage to all of the board. You could then use a Circle of Healing, even just your hero power. You'll draw a card for certain. Shadow Boxer goes off and punches something for 1. And if you've used a spell like, say, Holy Nova, that will heal all 3 of your own minions, you're going to draw 3 cards. Shadow Boxer is going to punch 3 different minions for, or just 3 different enemies, not necessarily minions. It can punch the opponent's face. And then the Holy Nova is going to go off and deal 2 damage to the whole enemy board, heal you for 2, and then Pyro goes off again, and it's just beautiful. On top of that, the Shadow Boxer, really not bad in this kind of a deck, because he's still a mech with a 2-3 body. On top of that, you combo it with Earthen Ring, Farseer, and Light of the Naru, where the entire point is to be hurting your opponent, and then maybe you could heal yourself. And Shadow Boxer will just punch things for you, and help keep that board clear, especially against Cancer Hunter, who is so fond of 1-health minions. Zoo uses 1-health minions to some degree, but it's definitely not nearly as bad. The new Death Rattle Mage that's coming out too, it does look a lot different than the Robot Unicorn deck I crafted. So I was kind of off base with what I made as what I thought would come out, but the concept was spot on. There is a Death Rattle Mage, so there we go. Jeeves is an enabler. GG. Anyway, so Shadow Boxer's good against that. So this deck's just got all sorts of ways to keep the board clear. In addition, because it's got Pyromancer, it's got plenty of 1-mana spells, it's got, you know, Holy Smite, Light of the Naru, Power Word Shield, Circle of Healing, Mind Blast, and then Holy Nova. So you've got plenty of ways to trigger Pyromancer and try to keep the board clear with him. Shadow Bomber works with the fact that you should always be able to heal yourself because you're using Shadow Bomber, and you'll probably be taking damage from aggro decks anyway. And you've also got Holy Nova and the classic Alchemy Circle of Healing, turn 4 Flame Strike combo. So this deck has 4 different board clear mechanics. 4. And plenty of ways to trigger them. You should easily stomp on Cancer Hunter if they try to put anything on the board. Additionally, because I've already gone over Earthen Ring, which can restore health to you, Holy Nova restores health to you, Light of the Naru restores health to you, your hero power does it, Holy Nova, I already said Holy Nova, Holy Fire does it. This deck's just got healing out the wazoo when it needs it. You shouldn't have any problem surviving against a Cancer Hunter. Or even a Zoo for that matter. So, when you need it, this deck can really just turn from healing to damage, and it does it when it needs it. To help with this concept, we've got Prophet Velen. You can drop him on turn 7 if you want. I don't recommend it. He's usually used to combo turn 9 with a Mind Blast for basically a Pyroblast to the opponent's face. He can also be used with things like, I think... No, he doesn't work with Shadow Bomber, but he will work with Light of the Naru to either heal you or to, if you have Alchemy out, heal the opponent, heal, for 6, which is pretty crazy. So, using Prophet Velen, assuming you have Alchemy out, you could actually do 16 damage in one turn by just going Mind Blast, Light of the Naru, the opponent's face. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, yeah, you should just be healing really easily. Northshire should keep you gassed up. It's got plenty of draw. With Pyromancer, you know, you could go get ridiculous amounts of card draw, especially with Circle of Healing helping out. You've got Power Word Shield, the best cantrip in the game. Aside from that, you really don't have other draw mechanics, so be careful with Northshire. This Northshire isn't going to deal a ton of damage or really affect the state of the board, so only drop it as a draw mechanic. In this deck, it is a spell, not a minion. Yeah. Holy Smite can help keep the board clear. I've been debating switching Holy Smite for Shadow Word Pain, but I think with Pyromancer and with all the other spells in this deck needs every ounce of damage it can get, because sometimes it's going to be the difference between winning and losing by just being able to smite the opponent's face. Lighter Than Rue should easily give you Light Wardens. Something's going to be damaged enough to summon a Light Warden, and if you've got Alchemy out, you can start killing things and then summoning Light Wardens. So, yeah. Holy Fire keeps you gassed up. Beyond that, we also do run a Blingtron. Why? Well, the Battlecry of Equip a random weapon for each player is really quite fair. And the stats aren't that great for a 5-mana card. But here's the thing, this deck is trying to burst the opponent's health down. So, whatever weapon he equips for you, assuming you even get something half decent that has 3 attack or more, he is still a 3 damage spike, and potentially far more, especially with something like a Gorehowl or Ashbringer or Doomhammer. Really, there's a plethora of good weapons he could give you. And, yeah, he just adds to the whole damage concept. So, this deck is just meant to kill off aggro by shooting damage all over its face, healing itself up very easily, and having board wipe in spades. So that's what the Vampire is supposed to do. It's supposed to hurt the opponent while healing itself and be able to just choose which it wants to do based on the matchup. It also will do absolutely ridiculously well against Handlock, who will tap themselves down to 20 by the time they start even playing minions. Yeah, their minions will be big and scary, and oh my goodness, but still, with the amount of damage you should be able to spit at them, they shouldn't even be able to get to their Antique Heal bot, because they run it A as a one-of, but B, they hurt themselves so much anyway that let's just go and absolutely wreck their health. Because if my opponent gets out a Drake on turn 4, a Twilight Drake, and it's, you know, say a 4/9, well, that's fine if I've already got a Shadow Bomber, a Shadow Boxer, a Pyromancer, and an Earthen Ring sitting on the field, or forget even the Shadow Boxer, say an Alchemy instead. That's fine, I've already got 4 minions on the board. I'm going to be pounding this guy's face in, followed up with shooting like a Mind Blast and, I don't know, maybe another Earthen Ring into his face the next turn, for another 8 damage on top of whatever's on the board, on top of what I've been doing all game. Handlock will just have terrible problems with this deck because it can spit so much damage. And so will Cancer Hunter because it heals for so much while still spitting damage. Zoo, the insane amount of board wipe, will easily make up for the fact that this deck isn't super heavy on board control spells, but the minions are just ridiculous. And the number of triggers for Pyromancer are pretty up the wall too. So, I think this deck is good against aggro. I think it's great against Cancer Hunter and Handlock, my 2 least favorite decks in the meta. It's not that great against Control Warrior, but once Control Warrior resurges, Steel Priest is going to be pretty ridiculous. And once Steel Priest ends up at the top, then Handlock is going to be ridiculous, and this thing will cycle right back in. All the while, the whole theme of Hunter isn't going to work because this thing will just push Hunter out every single time. This thing is just better at doing what Cancer Hunter does, in my opinion. Not because it's consistently faster than Cancer Hunter, but because the same decks that Cancer Hunter tends to stomp on are the very decks that this thing should be able to crush with ease. So, that's the Vampire. Heal yourself while hurting your opponent. Pretty vampiric, and we've got Shadow Bomber as the mascot. I would personally love to test this deck. I think it would be absolutely OP in this meta, because every time I don't run into Cancer Hunter in this meta, I'm running into Handlock or Control Warrior, and while as a Steel Priest I am fine with fighting a Control Warrior, or even another Steel Priest, because I think I just know how to play a little bit better than they do. Yeah. I think this really stomps on two of my least favorite decks. And I think it'll be strong in the meta because it's still got a decent matchup against even Steel Priest, because Steel Priest runs so little healing now. The only thing that Steel Priest does is has Holy Nova and Hero Power, which is why it's so weak to Cancer Hunter. So, unless Holy Fire sees a resurgence in Priest decks, and I'm not sure it will, there's really not a ton of room. I think this is just going to be a crazy good deck. I could be wrong, but again, board wipe, damage, healing, it just doesn't have control. There's no element of control in here. So, we'll see. I want to see how this does against the Death Rattle Hunter. I really do. Anyway. This is the Vampire, guys. My view of how Priest could really go aggro in the new meta. And, I think it's strong. I don't have the cards to play it, unfortunately. I did dust my Velen. I could have probably crafted this whole thing if I, instead of crafting Vol'jin and Harrison, had gone for crafting the Blingtron, and I kept my Velen. I'd still be down Shadow Bombers and Shadow Boxers, so maybe not, but yeah, I don't have the cards to play this, so I can't actually show this deck to you guys, unfortunately. The whole system of Hearthstone doesn't really permit it, so oh well. But yeah, I want to see this ran so bad, but I can't do it because I'm so far off in dust. I still need what? That's 800, another 3,200. So 4,000 plus. Okay, so I still need 4,200 dust to run this. Make that 4,400. So, yeah. I don't have what it takes to run this deck. But hey. Steel Priest is pretty fun, and, someone will find a way to deal with Cancer Hunter. I'm not sure if this will be the way to deal with it, but I think this is a really, really solid deck, and I want to see what it does in this meta. Because it's so much fun to gain tons of life while hitting your opponent for tons of damage. Anyway, that's been the Priest Theory Crafting with Part 3. Thank you all for watching.